Welcome back to the Crosswalk.com Inside the Editor's Room podcast. I'm Stephen McGarvey, the editor-in-chief of Crosswalk and the editorial director of Salem Web Network. Now, I'm joined today by a couple of my fellow editors to talk about a topic. Why don't we just go around the room real quick and introduce ourselves?
I'm Rachel Dawson, the design editor.
And I'm Sean McAvoy, the managing editor at Crosswalk.
Now, last week we had a long-form discussion.
Our first one.
Our first podcast episode that kind of centered around Barnabas Piper's book about curiosity. And as you probably know, Barnabas has been blogging and writing in the Christian space for a long time. And there was one article that he had written a couple years ago in particular that sort of caught the attention of the editorial team at the time. And then last year he reran it again on Facebook. And we just wanted to unpack that a little bit. Now, it was sort of off topic from the curiosity topic of his book, but I still had the opportunity to ask him about it when we had our conversation. So we're going to play that for you, and then Sean, Rachel, and I are going to chat about it a little bit. Here's Barnabas. We love that article that you wrote about stop calling your wife smoking hot. It was one of those articles, I think, for us that just sort of captured that thing that we've noticed and has made us uncomfortable that we've never able to say out loud before. And like any great writer or journalist, you sort of got that, like, yeah, why is that? Can you talk a little bit about that and why you think that happens in Christian circles and why we might want to stop doing that?
Yeah, I think the positive behind it is the guys, usually they're pastors, from what I have observed. Usually the reason they're doing this is because they're trying to publicly honor their spouse. Uh-huh. That is a great thing.
Sure.
I just think there are far better ways to do it than calling her smoking hot or hot in general. By all means, call her that. Just do it when other people are not around and not for everybody else's benefit. Because that is a term that's like a rating term. And so like you said, how do you respond to that? Because if you say, yes, she is, well, that's the wrong answer. Because, if you said your wife was smoking hot and I was like, yep, well, that's the wrong answer.
That leads you down a very bad road, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
But if I said nope, also the wrong answer. Because so by posing that phrase, you're basically putting people in a position where they have to gauge the hotness of your spouse, which is not what anybody is shooting for here. And so I think there are ways to call attention to your attraction to your spouse in a way that actually is honoring. I mean, even just publicly saying you are in love with them, using terms like lovely or beautiful, because those are more comprehensive terms that can also incorporate actual personhood. Hot only talks about the way somebody looks. If somebody's hot, they could be a heinous, awful person. But if somebody's beautiful, usually that reflects something about how they carry themselves, how they are as a person. So it was a tongue-in-cheek article on the one hand, but it was also a thing that really grates on me because it puts everybody in a bad spot. It puts your spouse in a bad spot. It puts you in a bad spot. And it puts me as the one I just have to sort of back away slowly if you say your wife is hot and be like, but I'm so glad you think so. and so, it was tongue in cheek, but also just sort of for goodness sake, please stop doing this. It just makes life awkward for everybody.
Yeah. There's probably better ways to convey the value you see in your spouse than that phraseology, which sort of like limits you to physical attractiveness.
Yeah, and I wasn't trying to make a big theological point out of it, more just a social awkwardness point. And I think for pastors, there is an element also of you're setting an example. And if you want to set an example of honoring a spouse or significant other, well, actually honor them. Don't use this sort of trite public. It's basically a public display of being a teenage boy and lacking vocabulary rather than a public honoring of somebody who you genuinely love.
This smaller episode of the Inside the Editor's Room podcast, we're going to just focus on this one topic and have a shorter episode that takes place in between the long-form episodes where we all talk about several things. I know this sparked a lot of conversation with us when it first came out. What do you guys think about this?
Well, I had a friend who several years ago was in the habit of, in his regular blog, referring to his wife as Smokin' Hot. And I never really thought much about it. That's kind of sweet. Mostly because I think I'm in the habit of giving people the benefit of the doubt until his wife told him to stop doing it. It made her uncomfortable. And I know Rachel's going to give us a little bit of a perspective of a female blogger on this in a minute as well. But you know who I blame? It seems to me like this is a little bit of a social media or a Facebook thing. But that's not where I'm laying the blame for this one. I'm putting it on Ricky Bobby himself for the prayer in the movie Talladega. It even happened during a prayer, and Barnabas says this is common amongst pastors. And I think that's how it got into the vernacular for a lot
Really?
is hearing Ricky Bobby thank God for his smoking hot wife during his prayer. I think that's
the cause of it.
You and I quote Will Ferrell movies all the time.
That's true.
I've seen it quoted
and probably
in several.
not something we should be admitting here, but
right.
it
And
is true.
I think that's how it got into the vernacular, even as a well-meaning thing. But for me, I had a college professor talking about good writing, in particular the phrase, it goes without saying. And his thing was, if it goes without saying, let it go without saying. And I feel like you married your spouse, presumably, not because you thought they were ugly. So let's talk about something else. Maybe your wife or your husband, in whatever case, you were really proud of the meal they cooked or of the way they talked to your daughter about that situation that happened at school. Give us somewhere to go with a conversation rather than a dead end. To me, it's almost like when someone uses the word whatever on you in an argument. Okay, conversation over, nowhere to go, back away. And that's what this smoking hot situation feels like to me.
Yeah, there was an article on Relevant Magazine by Bronwyn Lee where she talks about this from a woman's perspective, which I found helpful, obviously, as a woman. And a line that stood out to me from what she said was that our culture says the most important thing about you is your good looks, but our Creator says the most important thing about you is looking like Jesus. So I agree, Sean. I think calling out the qualities of somebody's, more of their humanity, or like Barnabas said, like their personhood, like that's so much more valuable to me than just somebody talking about looks. I mean, as a woman, I don't want that to be the thing that is the topic of discussion in any sort of context that I'm in. I would so much rather people kind of just call out or praise more deep things about me, the things that do make me just reflect who Jesus is and not just how I look.
And I'm much more interested in hearing about that because I already know what you look like.
Right.
So I don't know what other things you've done that might be really cool.
And there's the sense in which your looks are something that you don't have a lot of control over. You have some, but it's not like character where you work really hard to do the right thing. Any other way you could praise someone.
Sure.
You have more personal control over than, the way God made you. So it's always sort of struck me as this is probably not the thing we should be talking about just at its core because of we are limited to how much we can do to change our looks. But also just the awkwardness of if you're having a conversation, there's not really any way to keep that conversation going.
Barnabas did a great job of explaining that.
Yeah.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? Neither one works.
Yeah, exactly. And I think too that, when you're talking about these things, people's intentions, you certainly have to take people's intentions into account. And obviously someone who says that is intending to show that the affection that they have for their spouse, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that in this situation, the way that you do that, there are good ways to do that, and there are bad ways to do that, and it sort of puts the person who's on the other end of that information in sort of an awkward position.
It plays towards, you don't want to, someone means well, but for myself, I always want to be on the lookout for, considering other people and how things I say may come across to them and whether or not they can allow for discussion or not, or whether it just shuts the door.
I know one other thing that Bronwyn said that just seemed like it summed it up well is the issue is really context, right? Like that's great that you think that and that you feel that and you want to say it, but say it to them because it said here, like the lover's words are for his beloved and the beloved's are for her lover. It's not for the rest of us. We don't really need to hear that or be part of that. So
Nice Song of Solomon quote there.
Yeah.
Bringing us back to the Bible.
All right. Always.
So, it's really a fortuitous that we have this sort of tidbit to talk about that Barnabas talked with us with his interview, because next week our attention is to talk a lot more as a full podcast segment in our full episode about the awkward things that Christians tend to say to one another in church and in Bible study and
online.
And it's going to be a much longer, more fun conversation. Hopefully, we can bring a lot more of these sort of oddities that come out of the Christian space. And
it'll be fun.
We'll dissect that a little bit more with a gentle spirit.
And that brings us to the end of this mini episode. Thanks to Stephen Sanders and Kyle Fletcher, our audio engineers. And to find more about the topics we talked about today, or to listen in on our very first episode and to tune into future episodes, be sure to visit our site insidetheeditorsroom.com, and also subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, TuneIn, or SoundCloud to get our latest episodes right to your phone. Thanks for listening.